Have you ever wondered how Elizabeth Bennet goes from not handsome enough to tempt Mr. Darcy at the ball to one of the most handsome women of his acquaintance? What is going on there? Is this one of those cases where someone's personality is just so sparkling that it overrides how you physically see them and they become beautiful in your sight? Or is Jane Austen doing something very interesting with the perception of beauty in her novels? That's what we're going to be breaking down here today, including covering some words that she uses quite a bit in her books that in large part have lost their meaning for modern readers. So, if you want to learn all about that, then definitely stay tuned for today's video. My name is Ellie Dashwood, and this is my channel where we talk about history and literature. If you like either of those things, please subscribe. So what is the nature of beauty when it comes to human beings? Are we like pieces of art that you can just look at and sum up according to some preset rules? In our recent video on how to be a Regency era beauty, we broke down the beauty standards of the day, which were heavily focused on symmetry and proportions and ideal features that they thought people should have in the time period. And we see in the book, Pride and Prejudice, that Mr. Darcy considers himself a little bit of a connoisseur of beauty. He understands these rules and he can, sum up a woman quickly. We see that this is how he initially approaches Elizabeth Bennet. He treats her very much how you would treat a landscape painting or a statue. He thinks he can look at her, decide exactly what features she has, and then give her a rating almost. So we know in his first encounter with Lizzy, he thinks her scarcely pretty and not handsome enough to tempt him. But he decides to dive deeper into this, right? He really wants to focus on how just unattractive she is according to these rules. And it says, when he next met, he looked at her only to criticize. He made it clear to himself and his friends that she had hardly a good feature in her face. So here we have him not only deciding to continue to analyze why she is so not attractive, but he needs to discuss it with all of his friends. He's out there publishing his findings on this topic. He is sure deeply interested in this. But throughout the story of Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Darcy has many, many lessons to learn. And in a lot of ways, Elizabeth is the vehicle that teaches him these lessons. His interactions with her often challenge his assumptions and the way he views the world. And when it comes to beauty, she does the same exact thing without even realizing it. And one of the vital lessons he learns is to see beauty in 3 dimensions. He learns about the dimension of motion. Now, this dimension of motion is one of the things that starts making him interested in Lizzy, the way she moves and expresses herself. The book says, after he makes it clear to everyone that her face has no good features, he began to find it was rendered uncommonly intelligent by the beautiful expression of her dark eyes. To this discovery succeeded some others equally mortifying. Though he had detected with a critical eye more than one failure of perfect symmetry in her form, he was forced to acknowledge her figure to be light and pleasing. And in spite of asserting that her manners were not those of the fashionable world, he was caught by their easy playfulness. Basically, he starts seeing the fact that when she is in motion, she's beautiful. Her expressions have intelligence, her manners have playfulness, her figure has this light, bounding quality that is a hallmark of Lizzy as she bounds over stiles, and basically he likes watching her. Now, at first, it might seem to be just that old adage of it's someone's personality that makes them pretty in your eyes, right? Or it's only a face a mother could love because they can see their inner person and truly value who they are, right? And it makes you kind of blind to the physical. But that is not what's happening here in Jane Austen's books. Rather, Darcy finds Lizzy pretty in motion. So if he was watching her from across the room and had no clue what words were coming out of her mouth, just watching her visually was beautiful to him. Now, this is actually a concept that was very well developed in the Regency era that I feel like has gotten lost a little bit over time, and that is the idea of countenance. So in the 19th century, this is how they understood the concept of countenance. The countenance is the face as expressive of the soul, with its thoughts, reflections, passions, or emotions, and so belongs only to human beings. Basically, it's the combination of your face with your personality. Saying you like someone's countenance is like, your personality looks cute on your face. It's cute watching you. It's beautiful the way your face moves as you speak. Now, this is actually a physical manifestation of inner traits and qualities, right? Lizzy is playful by nature. She's intelligent by nature. But really, it's the combination of her facial features and the way those qualities play out across her face that visually create this pleasing aesthetic. You guys all know how much I dislike Lord Byron. He was a terrible guy, but he does give us some great quotes on countenance for this video, so we have to go to him. He says that, "I do not talk of mere beauty, of feature or complexion, but of expression, that looking out of the soul through the eyes, which, in my opinion, constitutes true beauty." So it was a well-developed concept in the era, is that the expressions on your face could have a dramatic impact on how you visually looked and could thereby constitute true beauty, as Lord Byron put it. Now, I find that people's countenance is often the most beautiful when they're happy, when they're learning new things, when they're going on new adventures. And that's one of the reasons that I'm planning a trip to South Korea, because I think that will definitely make me happy. And I'm going to vlog it for you guys over on my vlog channel, so definitely check that out and subscribe if you haven't already. But vlogging an entire trip is actually quite an undertaking, so I thought I would upgrade my skills with this video's sponsor, Skillshare. So Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes led by industry experts on topics from cooking and sewing to art and design to writing and how to use AI. Skillshare can help you take your career and skills and hobbies and passions to the next level. So, to prepare for my trip to Korea, I dove into their class, Romanticizing Your Life, a beginner's guide to creating vlogs for YouTube by Carey Cakes. It was just what I needed. Even though I've been a full-time creator here on YouTube for 4 years now, I still love upgrading my skills with Skillshare. And this class gave me like new little tips and different things I want to try the next time I record a vlog. Also just that general like feeling that like, yeah, I can do it. And I've upgraded so many skills with Skillshare, including audio editing and color grading and cinematography and learning how to draw, learning how to crochet. If you have followed me for a while, then you know I've learned a lot on Skillshare. So if you would love to upgrade your creative skills, then definitely check out Skillshare. The first 500 people to use the link in my description will get a 1-month free trial, so definitely check it out today. Now, let's break down countenances. And this concept of countenance is a very important factor throughout Jane Austen's novels. She uses the word a lot, and it usually has one of 3 meanings. In Persuasion, for example, we see them talking about family countenance or family resemblance, for example, to Mr. Elliot. But the more common usages are either to a singular expression on someone's face. For example, we see that Eleanor did think the question a very odd one, and her countenance expressed it. So someone could have a countenance at that moment. They could be like surprised or in love or whatever else expression is on their face. However, even bigger, more important, and more common way she uses countenance is as a marker of someone's overall description. Now, this type of countenance is defined as the countenance consists of the general aggregate of looks produced by the mind upon the features. So we're talking about the way you generally look, right? Like, what is the overall expression you have on all the time? What vibes is that giving off? So for example, we see that Mr. Bingley has a pleasant countenance. Mr. Darcy has a forbidding, disagreeable countenance. Mr. Wickham has a fine countenance. And Lydia has a good-humored countenance. Now again, just watching any one of these characters from across the room, you could decide what their countenance was just from watching their facial features and the way they carry themselves and express themselves to others. So for example, you don't have to go talk to Lydia to know that that girl has some good humor going on. Likewise with Mr. Darcy, it didn't take him long watching Lizzy across the room to discover that she's intelligent and playful and light. Now, countenance was seen as incredibly important in the era by a lot of people. A writer from 1837 says, "Beauty and expression combine their rival charms, so that it is difficult to say which of the two imparts most to the loveliness beheld." So this writer is saying that if you look at someone and you're like, wow, they're so beautiful, the expressions on their faces and the way they express themselves and how that looks on their features is just as important as what their features look like. So basically, in humans, beauty is a two-part equation where they are both equally important. And some people thought that countenance and expression was even more important, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So Jane Austen was definitely not coming up with any new idea here in her novel, but what she was doing was defending an existing one, right? Because there were the supporters of countenance is super important, and then there were the opposers that were like, no, it's all about symmetry. You can judge people like you can judge a statue. And we see it's interesting in Darcy's plotline. At the beginning of the story, he's kind of like the first side, and he has to learn the hard way that, wait, no, countenance is in fact important. The same way that he has to unlearn family pride and other misconceptions he has about life. And Jane Austen does a lot to uphold the importance of countenance throughout her books. For example, we see in Mansfield Park that Mary Crawford is considered pretty, though she is not as pretty as the Bertram sisters. And it's interesting because when Edmund has a huge crush on her, he comments that what makes her truly beautiful is her expressions and her countenance. He says, "It is her countenance that is so attractive. She has a wonderful play of features." And it is that this idea of like, wow, just watching your face as you talk or interact with you, that's what's truly beautiful about you. And really this idea that it's the countenance that makes a beautiful woman truly beautiful was also upheld by Lord Byron. He says, "Women have been pointed out to me as beautiful who never could have interested my feelings, from their want of countenance or expression, which means countenance, and others who were little remarked have struck me as being captivating from the force of countenance." So here he's saying that traditional beauties, if they don't have this countenance, they're not that pretty to him. But a woman who isn't that remarkable in her features can be truly captivating if only they have that expression, that play of features, as Edmund puts it in Mansfield Park. And that does bring up this other issue that not everybody was as expressive in their facial features, in how they show their emotions, but being expressive in itself was again considered beautiful. For example, when we see Mr. Crawford sizing up Fanny after she goes through a little bit of a growth spurt, and he's like, wow, she's so pretty now. He says, "I used to think she had neither complexion nor countenance, but in that soft skin of hers, so frequently tinged with a blush as it was yesterday, there is decided beauty. And from what I observed of her eyes and mouth, I do not despair of their being capable of expression enough when she has anything to express." So again, he is sizing up Fanny in the two-part equation of actual physical features with her complexion and blushing, which we went into so much in the Regency beauty standards video. But here's the second part of the equation, that expression, that countenance. And he's like looking at her face being like, If you had emotions to express, are you capable of actually expressing them? And one of the things that Fanny's countenance has going for it is that she looks pretty when she speaks. The book says when she spoke, her countenance was pretty. Now, this is very similar to Mr. Darcy in Pride and Prejudice, where Aunt Gardner notes that there's something pleasing about his mouth when he speaks. So characters could sometimes have like a very specific thing that they're good at, right? It's like, wow, when you speak, you're pretty. Let's go into some practical tips here now. How can someone have a good countenance? One essential is to have good traits of mind, or basically character traits and personality traits. Now, for example, we see in Pride and Prejudice, Aunt Gardner mentioned about Darcy's countenance. There's something of dignity in his countenance that would not give one an unfavorable idea of his heart. Basically, people thought that your countenance revealed who you were inside, right? So Darcy has such dignity, he must have a noble heart in there. Likewise, Elizabeth's eyes give the impression of intelligence, and people assume she's intelligent. And people thought that if you had bad or negative character traits, or even just lived a really harsh or hopeless life, that you would have an ugly countenance, right? The idea was good character traits lead to a good countenance, bad character traits lead to a bad countenance, which is one of the things we see sort of going wrong with Mr. Darcy at the beginning of the story, where he has a very forbidding countenance. People are like, I know who you are on the inside. Look at your countenance. You're a forbidding person. Nobody likes you, Darcy. Now, once you have these great character traits, the next thing you need to do is actually express them. Again, if you keep all of your character traits and personality traits bottled up inside, no one can see them on your face, no one can admire them on your face, and no one can feel like they are able to read your heart. Again, let us turn to Lord Byron for answers on this. A woman's face ought to be like an April day, susceptible of change and variety. But sunshine should often gleam over it to replace the clouds and showers that may obscure its luster. Smiles ought to be ready to chase away the expression of pensiveness or care that sentiment or early ills call forth. Women were meant to be the exciters of all that is finest in our natures, and the soothers of all that is turbulent and harsh. Of what use, then, can a handsome automaton be, after one has got acquainted with a face that knows no change, though it causes many? So what Lord Byron is saying here is that a woman's face should change with her emotions, with the moods. Obviously, its dominant quality should be one of smiles and happiness, but it shouldn't just be static. And it should express these changing moods to the world. So when we see Jane Austen characters who are described as having countenance, basically they have these facial expressions going on. They are susceptible to change like an April day. Now, something very interesting about countenance in Jane Austen's novel is that it's not infallible. In fact, it's often the cause of a great deal of trouble. So let's look at two examples in Jane Austen's novel where we have false countenances. Now, these false countenances, usually what they're doing is giving a character the impression that they have certain character traits that they in fact do not. Now, this can go from an innocent perspective or a sinister perspective. So, for example, let's first look at Jane Bennet. So Jane Bennet is so sweet and so pure in so many ways. However, she is also out there giving some false countenances. For example, on whether she actually likes Mr. Bingley or not. So Lizzy's thoughts on the matter were that she thought it was great that no one could tell that Jane liked Bingley. It says that Jane united with great strength of feeling, a composure of temper, and a uniform cheerfulness of manner, which would guard her from the suspicions of the impertinent. Lizzy thinks this is great, that she is able to withhold this expression on her face, right? Not show how she really feels. And she tells Charlotte Lucas such. However, Charlotte Lucas had an interesting warning. She says, "It may perhaps be pleasant to be able to impose on the public in such a case, but it is sometimes a disadvantage to be so very guarded. If a woman conceals her affection with the same skill from the object of it, she may lose the opportunity of fixing him, and it will then be but poor consolation to believe the world equally in the dark." Now, Charlotte is saying if she hides all of her feelings from her countenance and nobody can tell, she might lose Bingley, right? Because again, people in this era are reading people's hearts from the expressions on their faces. And what happens here? Well, they read Jane's heart on her face and decide, oh yeah, she's not interested in Bingley. And of course, we know that Darcy had a big hand in helping Bingley and Jane apart. And in defending that, this is what he says. "But I shall not scruple to assert that the serenity of your sister's countenance and air was such as might have given the most acute observer a conviction that, however amiable her temper, her heart was not likely to be easily touched." So there, Mr. Darcy was in fact attempting to read Jane's countenance and see what it had to reveal about her heart. And what was read there? Well, the false countenance that Jane was putting out, that she wasn't in love with Bingley. She's just friendly and nice and hanging out with him, but like, my heart is not involved. She imposed on the public, and in this case, on Mr. Darcy, a little bit too well. Meanwhile, what is a sinister example of some false countenances in Pride and Prejudice? Well, you probably guessed it. Mr. Wickham. He is described as having a fine countenance, of his countenance being far better than all the other officers. And we see it's very interesting when Lizzy's talking about like why we can trust Wickham on this crazy tale he has to tell about Mr. Darcy, that there was truth in his looks. Again, she is basing her estimations of who Mr. Wickham is, whether he's telling the truth, who he is on the inside, on his countenance. And then, of course, later, when they realize that they were deceived by Wickham, and Jane and Lizzy are discussing it, Jane notes, "Poor Wickham, there is such an expression of goodness in his countenance, such an openness and gentleness in his manner." Basically, again, she's like, but there's goodness in his countenance. And so the way that Jane Austen approaches countenance in her novels is actually quite complex. On one hand, she upholds it as an important factor in physical beauty and attraction, right? Like, countenances can make people beautiful, whether it's Mary Crawford, Lizzie Bennet, Mr. Wickham, or Henry Crawford. Basically, a countenance is very important. But at the same time, she raises multiple red flags when it comes to trying to read someone's heart off of their countenance. Often that is one of the underlying problems when people get deceived in her books, because their countenance was saying one thing when they were actually the opposite. A fascinating example of this complexity too is, again, back with Mary and Henry Crawford in Mansfield Park. Now, these countenances they have is super attractive, apparently. Like, it makes them look way better. But at the same time, those character traits that are making them so attractive visually to look at don't result in actual behavior that is attractive. For example, Mary Crawford is the same character throughout the entire story, and she doesn't really ever try to hide who she is. She is very straight up about her moral code and the way she views life, and sort of how jaded she is. But Edmund Bertram likes the way that looks on her. Again, he's like, wow, she's so pretty to watch. But what he doesn't realize is that when those character traits go into action, they're not going to result into actions that he actually likes. So what we see here is Jane Austen challenging this notion that good character traits will result in a good countenance and bad character traits will result in a bad countenance. Because here we have bad character traits resulting in a very attractive countenance, which is another way that Jane Austen is pointing out the danger of relying on countenances as a good judge of character. So how did Lizzy attract Mr. Darcy? Well, first, she had great character traits, and then she let them play out across her features and drew him in with her countenance. Let me know in the comments down below. What do you think of countenance? Do you think you have a good countenance? Do you think it's a reliable way to judge other people's characters? Let me know in the comments down below. And again, remember to check out this video's sponsor. So if you want to upgrade your creative skills, then definitely check out Skillshare. Remember, the first 500 people to use the link in my description will get a 1-month free trial. So definitely get started today. And as always, guys, keep being awesome, because you're awesome. Bye.